Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. La Niña conditions have officially developed and are expected to remain in place throughout the entirety of winter 2022. So brace yourself for more rain. The Australian government officially opened the borders and welcomed double vaccinated tourists and visa holders from around the world. Eligible visa holders can come to Australia without a travel exemption or quarantining, and concessions are being granted to skilled visa holders in order to incentivise them to stay in the country for longer. The latest overseas arrival data from the ABS shows total arrivals to Australia began rising a few weeks ago as international students, permanent residents and Australian citizens were welcomed back. Overseas arrival totaled 195,790 throughout December, up from 34,670 arrivals in December 2020. In the 5 years prior to COVID-19, ABS data suggests Australia would see around 1.8 million overseas arrivals per month. While December 2021 arrivals were only 10.4% of the December 2019 level, the pattern was much the same, with around 64% of visitors being short-term and only staying here less than a year. While priorities for entry to Australia at the end of 2021 were focused on returning Australian citizens and their relations, there will no doubt start to be an increase in demand for short-term accommodation. This will mean a lift in occupancy rates and revenue across the short-term accommodation rental market and commercial accommodations. This will benefit popular tourism destinations like Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, and regional locations such as Cairns and regional Tasmania. Notably, recent months have seen a relatively high segment of student visa entrants, as student arrivals have been prioritised to coincide with the February-March intake of the Australian universities. Rental demand from this cohort of migrants is likely to be most concentrated across the inner city precincts of capital cities with close proximity to academic hubs. For those migrating to Australia, which means intending to stay in the country for at least 12 to 16 month period, many factors determine where they will want to live. These include employment opportunities, housing affordability, visa conditions, the location of friends and family, and the makeup of the community, whether there is an established community where the large numbers of people from the same country already live. The flow of people arriving from overseas is different to the flow of people moving internally in Australia, which is part of why the housing market dynamics have looked a little different throughout the period of closed international borders. The biggest gains from internal migration are usually in the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. Most overseas immigrants tend to experience a 10-year cycle, which begins with the renting and shared accommodation, the likelihood of home ownership increasing with time in Australia, to the extent that the rates of home ownership amongst overseas migrants is comparable with those that are Australian born. This means that recent arrivals to Australia are most likely to be renting, and this is where housing market was most negatively impacted by border closures from March 2020. The pace of return is faster from some countries than others. While Australia has been relaxing travel conditions for international arrivals, there are still many factors that create some uncertainty around the speed of a migration recovery. These factors include a blowout in visa processing times and policies of travellers' home countries. Another factor is the time and cost associated with travelling to Australia, which was cited as a deterrent to visiting Australia in a recent survey of British residents. There is a lingering uncertainty around COVID-19, where variants of disease have led to fluctuations in travel restrictions. This makes high-cost trips for tourists relatively risky. The rapid rise in arrivals for Singapore may represent a relatively strong bilateral travel arrangement since November, as well as travel arrangements for skilled workers who have come in to fill roles in Australia. However, it is also worth noting that with a global tight labour market, expat programs are also drawing Australians back overseas, with more people actually leaving Australia for Singapore in January 2022. Housing preferences for skilled migrants may be subject to change over time. According to data from the Department of Home Affairs, 12.9% of skilled visas granted in the second half of 2021 were for arrivals to Queensland, up from an average of 11.5% in the 3 years to June 2019. Skilled visas granted across the board have declined, and the highest portion was still granted for New South Wales, 43.5%. However, it is interesting to note that the rise of popularity of regional Australia and Southeast Queensland domestically may eventually attract greater employment opportunities, business entries and overseas migrants to the same locations. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.